William Morris said, "Have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be beautiful or believe to be useful." And my friend Charles Ashby, when he was talking about the arts and crafts movement, said that if it means anything, it means standard, whether of work or of life. It is the protection of these standards, whether of producer or product. And it means that these two things must be taken together. I am Ethel Mairet, and over my life I have been very lucky to work and live with very many talented people. And we all lived and worked by these tenets. We were part of the arts and crafts movement. And the main thing that we worked for was to keep that handicraft and the natural work going. To work at a craft means steady and concentrated work. It cannot be done by few lessons in a workshop or an art school. Our workshops must become schools of workmanship, producing good workers as well as good work. We must take and teach apprentices. Perhaps I should start at the beginning. I was born in Barnstaple in 1872, the eldest daughter of James and Mary Ann Partridge. We lived on the high street and my father was a druggist and a chemist there. I have a younger sister, Maud, and a younger brother, Fred, and we all of us studied at the art school and we all have talent in that direction. We had a good upbringing. We all achieved various awards at the schools, and I even went and worked at an art school for a while. When I was awarded my diploma for pianoforte by the Royal School of Music, I then went to work in London as a governess, and then after that I went to Bonn in Germany, although I wasn't there for a very long time. I came back to Barnstaple where I met my first husband. His name was Ananda Kumar Swami, and as you will gather from the name, he was part Sinhalese. So his first major job was to go back to Ceylon, Sri Lanka for you, and he was to do a metallurgical study there. And I was to go with him as photographer because of my abilities with art and in my knowledge of photography. We went over there for 5 years and we worked very hard for that period of time, but we both of us discovered a really keen interest in the local embroideries and the textiles that are to be found there. And I used to go up into the hills to talk to the older gentlemen there who used to do the stitching, and I learnt from them and studied how they were stitching, and then I went and practiced, and eventually I started teaching in Kandy. It was very important to us that we documented everything really well, so we wrote many journals and kept many records of what we were finding and what we were seeing, and obviously brought back samples with us. And when we came back, we wrote several articles about the Sinhalese textiles. They were all under Ananda's name rather than my own. Ananda and I came back after 5 years. We came via India and studied and looked at some textiles there for about 3 months. I mean, we just had become totally infatuated almost with the textiles. We came back to live in Chipping Campden. My brother had moved there to the School of Handicraft, and he'd persuaded us that that'd be a good place to move to. And Charles Ashby, who ran the school, sorted out a house for us and had it all decorated and altered and made so that we'd be able to live and work there. The house was called the Norman Chapel, and it was fabulous. It had a huge room so that I could bring in weaving looms and lots of light and plenty of space for Ananda's work. And of course I needed a music room because I just love music. we went there, and that gave me a really good chance to learn more about textiles and weaving and spinning. I learned to spin there, and I learned about the natural dyes and how to use them. I did lots of travelling around the country to try and find out more about natural dyes and how they were used in the different parts of the country. And then Ananda got some more work out in India again. So we went back to India. Unfortunately, that's when our marriage split and I had to come back to England. So I moved back to Devon, to Saunton, just down the coast from Barnstaple. And I wasn't in a good state at that point. So I bought some land and decided to build my own bungalow. So I did some designing, and an old friend from the School of Handicraft days, Ethel Mairet, came down and helped me. He's a draftsman, and he did quite a bit of work on the Norman Chapel as well at one point. But he came down and he helped me, and he stayed and he worked with me on the building of the house. Obviously, I didn't build it myself. I got a builder in, but, you know, we had the house built. And then we stayed there for a short while. And when my decree came through for the divorce, Philip and I decided that we would marry. So we also moved back up to near to Stratford-on-Avon and Chipping Camden to a slattery, and moved into an ex-weaver's house. It was already set up as a tapestry weaving business, and we moved in there, and it gave me the chance to then think about taking on apprentices, because, as I said earlier on, it's really important that we keep handicrafts going and that we can pass on our knowledge and that we can make sure we train. So I took on 4 apprentices at that point, and they worked with me in the weaving room. And so things started going really well for us, and the business was really taking off. Then came the First World War, and of course that meant that affected life quite a bit. But because of all my work with natural dyes and the research I'd done, can you see these beautiful colours here? These are all natural dyes. They're done with woad and weld and madder, and the colours are just really rich and stunning. And I just wanted to convey that. So I wrote a pamphlet on natural dyeing, which a friend of ours, Mr. Pepler, down in Ditchling, offered to publish for us. So it became the Book of Vegetable Dyeing, and it was my first real publication in 1915. After the war had finished, Philip actually went down to Ditchling to work for Mr. Pepler on his fields, not in the publishing house at the time, but on the fields. And we decided that Ditchling would be a really good place to then move to and to build a suitable property. So we then had yet another house move. We do seem to like house moving, but we had another house move, and we bought some land. Philip and I did the designs and had the house built, and this house, Gospels, became our principal residence. It was just wonderful. I had this huge weaving room with beautiful big windows and lots of light, and I managed to get tanks put in underground so that I could collect rainwater, because you need lots of rainwater for natural dyes. And so we just had this perfect place to carry on with our work and take in apprentices and work with them and train them. Perhaps I should talk a little bit about weaving, as it's such an important subject to me. The weave inspiration comes from the colours, from the textures of the yarn. If I show you these, perhaps you can see that linen has a certain texture, but if you look at this yarn, it's a totally different texture, and the colours together with the different type of yarn will actually give you the inspiration to create your weaving. I really instill in my students that whatever else they do, they must not try and sit down and design their cloth by drawing it out on a piece of paper. You must get your inspiration from the fibres. Look at this. This is the texture and the design comes from within the weaving. It is not drawn out and written down. I do still love to travel to the various countries, you know, the ones that have the handicrafts still to the forefront of their work. Places like Finland and Estonia, or Serbia and Croatia. They really still work very hard at their handicrafts. Much of their work is so beautiful. I'll bring it back with me and sell it on or add it to my collection. It's just so beautiful. And we really need to take that inspiration. In the early 30s, Philip and I split up. He moved back up to London, but I stayed on at Gospels and I carried on taking apprentices. A lot of them at that time in the 30s came from Europe, from these countries with the strong handicraft connection. And it was a real pleasure to have them here because, of course, they had this instilled into them anyway. Unfortunately, with the advent of the war, that had to change and they were no longer able to come across. But I then opened a shop in Brighton so that we had an outlet for our woven cloth and for the yarns and for products that we made. We even started making clothes, and one of the things that I really liked was the style of dress that has now become known as a shirtwaister. It was a style that was very simple to make and very simple to wear, and that was extremely popular in the shop. The shop went very well and we carried on with that for quite a while. After the war, well, we just carried on weaving, and I actually stopped doing as much of the work myself and started doing more travelling around the country, doing exhibitions and showing off our work and doing negotiating with the different factories and yarn suppliers up in Lancashire and people like that. Overall, it's been a wonderful life, and I've had through my workshop some of probably the most famous weavers that there have been, people like Peter Collingwood and Marianne Straub. I have overall had the most amazing weaver's life.
Ethel Mairet died at Gospels on the 18th of November 1952. She was found with her Siamese cats beside her on the bed. Mary Barker, her friend, went into the workshop after the funeral. She said, "It's not bad to have done something creative on the last day of your life," when she found about a yard of weaving on the big loom. Mary Hill, a neighbour in Ditchling, described Ethel Mairet as a great craftswoman, a pioneering and strong, courageous character, but she was not always an easy person, and many stood in awe of her. For she had, as well as strong likes, strong dislikes too, and could be quite devastating in her judgments.